They didn't like what I was doing at all. And it took them a while to figure out how to deal with me, but they finally came up with a strategy. Just call her a denier, throw her
Yeah.
in the camp, with the cranks and the oil company zealots, and that way we can dismiss her. Okay.
What's fascinating, I think, about your journey, Judy, is that like you spent your entire career as a climatologist, specializing in hurricanes, atmosphere modeling, air to sea system, movements and connections, and actually climate modeling itself. And you've what I find compelling about your positioning in this is that you're arguing from both the inside and the outside of what's going on with the UN IPCC. And I just wanted maybe just to establish some of the background here. I think it was your book says that it was really around 1980, 1982 was it that the yeah 1980 that the UN EP, the environmental protection side, really started to get going, and it identified fossil fuels. Let's target those. And then it was 1985. You say that it then unmoored itself from actual real science, and then you had the 1992 U, UFCCC treaty, and then Kyoto 97, then Paris, and that brings us up to kind of speed today. But what's really interesting is that maybe you can just respond. You correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, by the way, because I'm just reading your material, and I may pick up things wrong. But what's very interesting is you said, look, the framing of all of this is faulty. I mean, they're framing it narrowly in on fossil fuels, and the kind of neutralizing, not entirely ignoring, but neutralizing some of the major other effects on the climate system that you describe as wicked, chaotic. In other words, it's a wicked problem, to use your words, and it's not linear. So therefore, the idea of just focusing narrowly on the wrong thing is creating the wrong solutions, and that really is the core of what you're saying. Obviously, with great detail. Is that correct?
Well, it's even worse than that because from the very beginning, starting in the 1980s, and certainly by the 1992 UN treaty, the policy cart has been way out in front of the scientific horse. I mean, they were set on this policy in 1992 before there was any real evidence of what was going on or any real understanding. They had an international treaty in place signed by 196 countries, including the US, that said, if I can paraphrase, to avoid dangerous anthropogenic climate change through removing fossil fuel emissions. I mean, that was put in place before we understood any of this, and the IPCC was set up to support the idea of dangerous human-caused climate change, not to look at the myriad causes of natural climate change, not to look at any benefits from warming, but to solely focus on dangerous human caused climate change. So, this very narrow framing from the very beginning, driven by policy and politics,
Mm.
set science on a really bad path. And the scientists got caught up in this. They had seats at the important tables, and they power politics and getting lots of media attention, and universities were developing big institutes around this idea. Everybody was on board, and then big business got involved, and then here we are, with a solution that isn't going to work to a problem that is really missing most of the point about climate variability and change.
In layman's terms, it strikes me like a bad cop movie, like a whodunit, where the murderer is already identified without any evidence, and then we spend the next 30 years looking for the evidence to nail to nail them in prison.
Yeah,
Can, can,
it's become more like a legal case,
yeah,
trying to find evidence to support one position than it is about the scientific process of open questioning and skepticism and challenging and all this sort of thing. So it's more like a legal brief. The IPCC has become more like a legal brief than a
yeah.
scientific document.
But then you talk about, which I found again, I kept turning your pages and stuff, this is really interesting. You know, this is the most interesting part of the book that I was finding even more interesting stuff. But to simplify it, what I found interesting is you're saying, look, the IPCC comes up with the science. Leave aside the quality of it for a minute and the narrow framing. We'll come back to that. But then the media then take the worst case scenarios and they blow it up in the media because that's what sells media headlines. And then the activists then amplify it even further because you know they're turning it into the world is over kind of. So there's three levels of amplification. There's level one, level two, and then level three. You know, where end oil and closing down city centres with marches and throwing stuff at paintings, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, all of this is enabled by the UN officials
Mm.
making all of these apocalyptic statements. Even with the most recent sixth assessment report from the IPCC, they knocked down warming quite a bit, and the UN has now thrown out the extreme emission scenarios. And so even from the UN, we're looking at maybe another 1.2 degrees warming over the rest of the 20th century, but they're crying code red, highway to hell, apocalypse,
Yeah.
from the UN Secretary General. So they're just amping this up and they're giving all of these artificial, politically motivated deadlines that mean nothing and they're impossible to reach.